TGI Fridays stands as a quintessential American dining establishment. For numerous decades, this chain has been delivering their famous loaded potato skins, mozzarella sticks, and countless other distinctive dishes throughout the United States and numerous nations worldwide. In 1986, they launched their inaugural overseas restaurant in England, subsequently growing into dozens of additional countries. Remarkably, roughly 10 years afterward, they became the pioneering American restaurant chain of this type to establish a presence in Moscow, Russia. Considering its substantial heritage, enduring appeal, and cultural impact, I'd characterize it as a legendary chain that has undoubtedly been the backdrop for countless cherished experiences. This makes it particularly disheartening to discuss the reality that TGI Fridays is currently facing serious challenges. To be transparent, this establishment has been encountering difficulties for an extended period. As evidence, here's a Chicago Tribune piece from 2005 that opens by stating, "If you haven't considered TGI Fridays recently, you're in good company." For considerably more than 10 years now, there's been a pattern of declining revenue as they've closed poorly performing establishments to a degree where in the U.S. they are currently approximately 1/4 the magnitude they once were. Once more, there isn't much encouragement to derive from any of this, but remarkably over the recent couple of years, it appears as though TGI Fridays has been operating in absolute crisis mode, shuttering more establishments than ever while they fight to settle their obligations. Kindly subscribe so you don't miss the next company that went from billions to bankruptcy. These stories are wild. I simply have this mental picture of the telephone ringing with the debt collector calling and TGI Fridays scrambling, rummaging through the sofa cushions, attempting to locate whatever funds they can to sustain them temporarily. Alright, perhaps that's overstating things slightly, but perhaps not. In 2023, the corporation replaced CEOs on 2 occasions alongside some significant menu modifications. Then throughout 2024, they revealed that they would be liquidating licensing privileges to Kraft Heinz to eliminate some of their obligations. You understand how they have those frozen appetizers and other TGI Fridays branded items at grocery outlets? Well, Kraft Heinz now possesses perpetual authority over those. Several months subsequently, they declared that they would be transferring their company-operated establishments to franchise operators to generate additional capital to eliminate debt, which is the precise opposite of their strategy from several years prior. It all becomes somewhat intricate in the specifics, but TGI Fridays relinquished authority of their holdings. A proposed merger was terminated, they shuttered an extra 50 establishments, and have submitted for bankruptcy protection. Those are merely some of the major developments. So in this video, I aim to attempt to address the fundamental question of what transpired with TGI Fridays, and I've compiled a list of what I consider to be the 5 primary causes behind their downturn. Singles bars. Beginning with singles bars. Now wait. I expect many viewers might be thoroughly puzzled at this moment, but it will become more logical when I explain that TGI Fridays originated as a singles bar, and arguably it was the inaugural one. In 1965, Alan Stillman was employed as a fragrance salesman in Manhattan's Upper East Side, where he would regularly visit a bar called Good Tavern. Like the majority of the other taverns during that era, that establishment had a nearly entirely male clientele. But Alan Stillman possessed somewhat of a brilliant concept for it. There occurred to be a substantial population of women residing in the vicinity, particularly models and airline attendants. So he reasoned that if the establishment had more of an inviting, lively environment, it could be an excellent venue for both sexes to socialize and encounter each other. So he obtained $5,000 from his mother, assumed control of the building on a temporary lease, and revolutionized it. He sanitized it, brightened it up, applied paint, incorporated numerous plants, and introduced those distinctive red and white striped employee uniforms. He possessed no background in the sector and acknowledges that he didn't truly understand what he was doing, but the strategy succeeded flawlessly. There were queues forming outside the entrance, and competitors rapidly began emerging. That achievement helped ignite an entire movement that became recognized as singles bars or firm bars, referencing those plants that were incorporated. That original TGI Fridays became such a phenomenon that individuals in different regions of the nation began reaching out to him about launching their own TGI Fridays. In 1970, after some years, he collaborated with someone in Memphis to launch the second establishment. and then 2 years following, a significantly larger one was launched in Dallas, Texas. However, by the mid-1970s, the culture was shifting, and singles bars had become more of a declining trend, which obviously presented a significant challenge for TGI Fridays. But I would contend that they executed an adequate job at responding to it. Their reaction was to shift into something that appeared significantly more viable: casual dining. Casual dining, a choice that would ultimately prove detrimental because I have it on my list as the subsequent cause behind their downturn. In the 1970s, TGI Fridays ceased attempting to draw singles in fashionable metropolitan locations in preference for drawing families in more conventional suburban locations. A substantial component of that strategy was to broaden the menu to provide more meals, and that is when they unveiled their signature potato skins, which is presumably the ideal representation of their fresh identity. Also during that decade, TGI Fridays was purchased a couple of times, ultimately being managed by a major hospitality corporation called Carlson, where it stayed for the following 40 years. Throughout that period, they developed it into a nationwide brand with hundreds of establishments across the nation. The challenge here is that casual dining was so viable that TGI Fridays was merely one of numerous chains that were developing during that period. Rivals like Applebee's and Chili's were gaining popularity, dividing the market share by drawing many of the identical patrons. And let's be honest, with each new rival added to the combination, it can become more challenging to distinguish yourself with your own identity. I mean, one of these rivals also had a weekday in its title. So if you were choosing if you want to visit TGI Fridays or Ruby Tuesdays, I don't know, it simply begins to merge together. But you know what? I'm going to venture out on a limb and suggest that in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, when the majority of these casual dining establishments were emerging, I believe that TGI Fridays actually executed a reasonably good job in preserving that unique identity. And the majority of that can be clarified by utilizing one word that happens to be the subsequent cause on my list: flair. Flair. I recognize that anyone who has viewed the film Office Space likely has a notion of what I'm going to express here. But hear me out, it is somewhat more intricate than you might be considering. See, tracing all the way back to the inception, TGI Fridays has consistently had substantial stylishness and creativity, as the term is defined. Just consider how Alan Stillman was attempting to draw women to the establishment by making it more welcoming and dynamic. And well, I believe that is the component that transferred over the most when making the shift into casual dining. You could observe it in the uniforms, the colors, and naturally all of that material that they were displaying on the wall. The film Cocktail from the 1980s is primarily remembered by the manner that the bartenders would rotate and toss the bottles around while serving up the beverages. In other words, they were exceptionally high with flair, and much of it is influenced by what was occurring at TGI Fridays. A portion of the movie was shot at that original establishment. Tom Cruise trained with a bartender from the corporation to learn how to execute that material, and Alan Stillman even asserts that the character was inspired by him. Still to this day, TGI Fridays hosts a World Bartender Championship competition. They attempted to make bartending an official Olympic event, and they even possess a world record for the most individuals cocktail flaring simultaneously. In brief, I would contend that the primary element that made TGI Fridays distinguish itself from all of the other casual dining establishments was the flair. But then I believe flair ceased being fashionable. Honestly, well, not to upset anyone, it may have consistently been walking a delicate line between uncool and cool, but this type of material was attractive to individuals. The movie Cocktail was among the top 10 highest-earning films of that year despite obtaining mostly unfavorable reviews. And whether you like it or not, the flair was a substantial component of the achievement of TGI Fridays. When Office Space was released in 1999, it notably ridiculed the flair, kind of revealing the ridiculousness of it at that moment and communicating what much of the public was likely already considering. Something that was once an asset had now become a liability. So I don't believe Office Space was directly accountable, but several years subsequently, TGI Fridays spent an estimated $200 million to execute a complete renovation that essentially eliminated the flair from their image. I promise I'm going to cease stating the word flair, but they eliminated the stripes on the uniforms, the suspenders, made the walls less cluttered, modified the coloring somewhat, made menu alterations. Everything became significantly more subdued. In 2013, They even streamlined the logo by altering the shape and eliminating the punctuation. Throughout all of this, they were mostly commended for the modifications because they did eliminate much of the material that was perhaps irritating individuals. But they also forfeited part of their identity and began blending in with all of the other casual dining establishments significantly more than they were previously. Anyway, perhaps you can acknowledge the challenging situation that they were in there. Fast casual. The subsequent cause on my list is going to be a quick one, but still extremely significant. Fast casual. It is a relatively new restaurant classification that exists between fast food and casual dining. I'm referring to establishments like Chipotle or Panda Express that have experienced explosive growth in popularity over the recent few decades, drawing patrons away from the more conventional casual dining concepts like TGI Fridays. I have discussed this on the channel numerous times previously and even identified it as a cause behind the downturn of other comparable establishments. So when they were already dividing the market between each other, and then all of these new concepts arrived to divide things even further, well, obviously there's going to be unfavorable news. External factors. Advancing to the final cause on my list, I'm going to simply label it external factors. Inflation, operational expenses, interest rates. Whenever a corporation is in such a precarious state like this, even a minor external challenge can magnify into having a substantial impact. Examining the recession, it was not beneficial for the majority of the industry because individuals had reduced funds to allocate on dining out establishments. But TGI Fridays was so affected by it that they failed to ever completely recover. In 2008, right as it was transpiring, they achieved their peak of 600 U.S. establishments, and that has been consistently declining ever since. In 2014, it was purchased after nearly 4 decades in an $800 million transaction. The pandemic is another evident external factor that damaged the corporation, probably far more than it should have. Just examining back at that graph from previously, we can observe that sales experienced, well, an understandable drop in 2020 while the establishments were closed or individuals were hesitant about eating outside of their residence. But those figures have not even approached returning to those prior levels. And to incorporate yet another layer on top of it, the corporation was in the middle of this major merger that would have converted them into a public corporation. It could have altered the trajectory for them in different ways, but it was essentially terminated due to the pandemic. Again, I am not suggesting that these external factors are the foundation of the challenge here, but they have complicated an already difficult situation. To summarize the manner I perceive the situation is that TGI Fridays is an aged brand that simply was not designed to endure on a large magnitude indefinitely. In fact, we have observed that numerous intelligent choices had to be executed for it to endure as long as it has. Evolving and adjusting is a substantial component of long-term business achievement, and honestly, I would suggest that TGI Fridays has executed a reasonable job at that over the years. Doesn't it appear like everything that made them successful eventually transformed into their failures? Singles bars, casual dining, flair, which constitute the majority of my list, all commenced as excellent concepts that either grew outdated or began to be supplanted. Clearly, TGI Fridays has not executed everything perfectly, but simultaneously, I'll acknowledge that I could envision myself making numerous of those identical choices that have guided them into this predicament in which they are currently confined. Let me know in the comments. What do you think about TGI Fridays? Was it superior in the past? Has it consistently been good? Or perhaps you believe it has never been good? Statistically speaking, the one nearest to you has likely shut down over the recent few years, if not within the recent few months, so I'm curious to hear how you perceive that. And also, where do you believe they went wrong? What I mean is, what should they have executed differently to avoid all of this difficulty? And finally, what do you envision for the future? Are they going to reverse things or continue along the identical path, existing on a smaller and smaller magnitude each year? And any other thoughts you have about TGI Fridays or anything else in this video, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.